Hey guys, tonight we begin Why You Wouldn't Last a Day in Tudor Britain. Forget everything Hollywood told you. This is the real story, and trust me, you probably wouldn't last a day. So, before you get too comfortable, hit that like button if you enjoy this kind of deep dive, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from now. Dim the lights, maybe grab a snack, and let's jump in. You wake up on a straw mattress, if you can even call it that. It is really just a sack filled with old reeds that poke you in the ribs, and yes, the smell is not just in your imagination, it actually is a cocktail of mildew, body odor, and mouse droppings. Congratulations. You have survived the Tudor version of a beauty sleep, except you look and feel like you rolled around in a barn fire, because technically you did. The bedsheets are a luxury item, meaning you do not have any. And the closest thing to a pillow is a bundle of rags that were once considered too ragged for wiping the floor. And if you think you can just sleep in for a while, forget it. The sun is rising and the rooster is screaming, its Tudor equivalent of an alarm clock, only this one does not come with a snooze button, unless you count strangling it, which would be frowned upon, because that chicken is probably dinner for the next 3 nights. You pull yourself upright in the half-dark of a timber-framed cottage, and you immediately notice that the walls are sweating with damp, and every crevice between the wood beams is a thriving ecosystem of insects and mold. So congratulations, you have also invented Tudor penicillin, except it will probably kill you before it cures you. The floor is dirt, the kind of dirt that never really goes away, no matter how many times you sweep it with your twig broom, and every step raises a faint cloud of dust that settles right back into your lungs, giving you that classic early onset Tudor cough that you will not survive past 40, but hey, at least you will not need to worry about retirement planning now. Before you can even think about food, you have to deal with what passes for personal hygiene, and let me be clear, this does not involve a toothbrush, mouthwash, or even soap. Instead, you might rinse your mouth with stale ale or cold water if the bucket has not frozen overnight, and you might rub your hands with sand or ashes, because yes, abrasives count as cleanliness in this world. Congratulations, you are now exfoliated and also bleeding slightly, but hey, beauty has always been pain. You step outside to use the latrine, which is really just a plank over a cesspit, and the smell hits you so hard you wonder if perhaps death itself might be preferable to relieving yourself. Hear the buzzing flies and rising steam of human waste in the morning air really set the tone for the day, and just when you were thinking maybe you will keep it in all day, you realize that constipation is a luxury, because you will soon be force-fed a diet designed to blast your intestines like gunpowder in a cannon. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Breakfast awaits, and it is every bit as thrilling as you imagined. A crust of hard bread, so tough it could probably double as building material, and, if you are lucky, a bit of cheese that has matured into something halfway between food and weaponized biology. You wash it down with small beer, which is just low alcohol ale that tastes like someone strained puddle water through old socks, but hey, at least it is safer than drinking the river water, which doubles as the town sewer. The taste lingers in your mouth like a curse, and you begin to realize that the modern concept of breakfast cereal with milk and sugar is centuries away, so you had better learn to love chewing on misery as the first meal of your day. Speaking of milk, the cow that produces it is standing outside in the mud, glaring at you with the dull resentment of an animal that knows you will soon steal her offspring and her bodily fluids. And in Tudor Britain, that cow is more valuable than you are, so try not to sneeze near it, or you might be the one sold off instead. Now that you have survived the morning meal, it is time to dress for the day, and you can forget about breathable cotton or polyester blends, because your wardrobe consists of scratchy wool that feels like wearing a carpet woven from the hair of your enemies. If you are a man, you are lacing yourself into hose and doublet. If you are a woman, you are layering on a linen makeshift wool gown and stiff bodice that makes breathing optional but appearances mandatory. All while hoping that lice will find someone else to snack on today. Spoiler alert. They will not. They love you dearly and they are already planning a banquet. On your scalp you try to tie your shoes, except they are not really. Shoes more like leather sacks with laces and about as comfortable as walking barefoot on cobblestones, which coincidentally is exactly what you will be doing all day, because the streets of Tudor towns are not streets in the modern sense. They are open sewers lined with trash chamber pot contents and dead animals, so every step is a gamble, and the odds are not in your favor. The smell alone could be bottled and sold as Tudor. Oh, the misery, and yet everyone just accepts it, because it is either that or starve in the countryside where wolves and bandits are waiting for dessert. You make your way into the street and immediately regret every life choice that brought you. Here there are pigs rooting in the garbage, chickens running underfoot, and children playing with sticks that are indistinguishable from weapons of war, not because they are strong, but because every child here is one cough away from unleashing the plague. The houses lean over the narrow alleys like they are conspiring to fall on top of you, and every window has someone dumping yesterday's chamber pot out with a casual shout of Gardilu, which translates loosely as incoming projectile of human misery. Congratulations, you are now part of the splash zone. You think about how modern city life has its own problems. Traffic, pollution, rent prices, but then you look down at your shoes, or rather at the lack of separation between your shoes and raw sewage, and you start to think maybe even a New York subway rat has it better than you right now. You wonder if you should just turn around and crawl back into bed. But remember, that bed was infested with lice and straw that poked you like a medieval acupuncture treatment. So congratulations, there is no safe option here. Only forward, and forward in Tudor Britain usually means toward work, which is not some exciting career path, but rather endless repetitive tasks designed to keep you barely alive. You might be assigned to fetch water from the communal well, which means carrying heavy buckets that cut into your hands and make your shoulders ache like you have been wrestling oxen all morning, and when you finally bring the water home, half of it has sloshed out onto the ground because physics has never been your friend. If you are unlucky, someone else has already been to the well and stirred up the muck at the bottom. So your water comes with bonus parasites. Enjoy the free protein. Modern people complain when their tap water tastes faintly of chlorine. You complain when your water wriggles. You catch yourself thinking maybe you would prefer to be indoors, sewing, spinning, or mending, but then you remember that indoor work in a Tudor cottage means choking on smoke from the central hearth, which has no chimney, so the entire room fills with fumes until your eyes water and your lungs feel like you have been living inside a barbecue pit. The good news is that smoke keeps away flies. The bad news is that it also keeps away oxygen, but hey, who needs that anyway? You glance around and notice your fellow Tudors are not exactly models of health. Everyone is missing teeth, covered in sores, or limping from untreated injuries, because medicine here is a fun blend of guesswork, superstition, and outright torture. If you catch a cold, you might be prescribed bloodletting. If you have a headache, someone will strap a dead pigeon to your scalp, and if you have the plague, well then, everyone will just politely nail you inside your house and wait for you to die. Modern people complain about their doctor running late. You complain because your doctor thinks leeches have a personality. Now, as the morning fog begins to lift and the sun actually starts to shine through the filth coated windows of your world, you realize that you have only made it through the first few hours of your Tudor day, and already you are exhausted, filthy, hungry, and vaguely traumatized. The thought of surviving until evening feels less like a challenge and more like a cruel joke, but do not worry, we are just getting started. Now that you have survived breakfast, and stumbled your way through the first chores of the morning. It is time to face the midday horrors of Tudor Britain, and I promise you, it does not get easier you find yourself trudging toward. The market square, because food does not magically appear in your pantry. There is no pantry, in fact. There is barely even a shelf to put anything on your stomach is already grumbling from that miserable crust of bread and lump of cheese that tasted like despair disguised as dairy, so you imagine maybe lunch will be better. Spoiler alert, it will not. The market greets you with smells so intense you wonder if perhaps the human nose was a design flaw. One store reeks of fish, so old it has begun to develop a personality, another wafts the aroma of raw meat covered in flies, and yet another offers baskets of vegetables that have clearly given up on life sometime last week, and through all this haze of rot, you must haggle with a merchant who knows you are desperate and will gleefully charge you the equivalent of your soul for a cabbage. You hold your breath and hand over a few grimy coins which feel sticky because Tudor currency is never clean, and congratulations. You are now the proud owner of something that could technically be classified as food if you squint at it hard enough. As you turn away, you nearly collide with a pig wandering freely through the crowd, rooting around in piles of garbage and reminding you that sanitation laws are not just lax, they are non-existent. The streets here are not paved with gold, they are paved with dung, mud, and despair, and every step you take feels like you are sinking further into the grand experiment of human misery, and as you dodge another chamber pot being emptied from a window, you start to understand why modern shoes with rubber soles are a luxury that you will never take for granted again. You clutch your purchase and head back home for the midday meal, which in Tudor terms means boiling whatever you manage to scavenge into a greyish soup that looks like something scraped out of a medieval cauldron, because it was you tossing bread, crumbs, a handful of wilting greens, and perhaps a scrap of salted pork. If fortune has smiled on you, and by smile I mean smirked cruelly from a distance, the taste is salty, bland, and slightly rancid, but at least it fills the hollow echo in your gut for another hour or two. You slurp it down and wonder if your intestines are screaming in protest or simply resigned to their fate, because every Tudor digestive tract is basically a war zone. At this point you might think you have earned a break, but no leisure is for kings, queens, and people who can afford to pay others to suffer in their place for you. There is always work waiting, and if you are in the countryside, this means endless hours in the fields bent double hacking at weeds or hauling manure under a sun that feels hotter than you expected because you forgot about the hole in the ozone layer called never existed. And if you are in town, you might be apprenticed to some craft that involves breathing in sawdust fumes or molten metal until your lungs collapse like soggy bread. The concept of workplace safety does not exist here unless you count praying that God personally intervenes to stop the hammer from crushing your skull, and good luck with that, because the Tudor God is very busy judging people for dancing on Sundays. If you are a woman, your tasks are no less miserable. You are spinning yarn, weaving cloth, scrubbing laundry in freezing water until your hands turn blue. And if you are lucky enough to have children, they are clinging to your skirts while coughing tuberculosis directly into your face. Motherhood in Tudor Britain is less about joy and more about praying half your children survive past age 5. Spoiler alert, they will not. As the hours crawl on you, begin to notice the rhythm of Tudor society, the bells tolling from the church tower calling everyone to prayer, because religion is not optional. It is compulsory, and failure to show your face in the pews can get you fined or worse. And of course, the service is long, repetitive, and about as uplifting as listening to someone read tax documents aloud in Latin which you do not understand anyway. You kneel, you stand, you mumble responses, and all the while your knees ache on the cold stone floor, and you think wistfully about how modern people complain church is boring, but at least they have pew cushions and heating. Once you finally stagger back into daylight, you notice the town stocks in the square already occupied by some poor soul whose crime was probably stealing bread, or maybe saying the wrong thing about the king. Their head and hands are trapped, their neighbors are throwing rotten food at them, and you realize that public humiliation is the Tudor equivalent of social media cancel culture, only with more risk of losing teeth. You laugh nervously and move along, hoping that today will not be your turn, because gossip is lethal here. One wrong word about Henry VIII or one careless joke about the Queen, and suddenly you are in prison, awaiting a very creative execution. Meanwhile, the afternoon sun beats down, and you are back at your tasks, this time hauling water again, because everything requires water, and every bucket weighs approximately as much as your soul. You stumble, spill some, get shouted at, and repeat until your shoulders feel like they are about to snap off. If you are an apprentice, you are getting shouted at anyway, because apprentices are basically free labor, and masters enjoy yelling at them the way modern bosses enjoy sending passive-aggressive emails. Your fingers are raw from work, your back feels broken, your stomach is already hungry again, and you realize that you are still only halfway through this dreadful day. Somewhere nearby, a drummer is beating a rhythm, because an execution is about to begin, and the entire town is gathering, because nothing says community bonding like watching someone be hanged, drawn, and quartered. You are pulled along with the crowd, partly out of curiosity, partly because not attending could look suspicious, and you find yourself standing shoulder to shoulder with neighbors while the condemned is dragged to the scaffold, their face pale, their hands bound. The priest muttering hurried prayers, the executioner sharpens his axe, because in Tudor Britain even death is entertainment. And as the blade comes down, the cheer of the crowd rises like a wave. You are horrified, but you clap too, because not clapping would be noticed, and in this society, being noticed is a very bad thing. You wonder if this is what passes for fun, because, if so, the Tudor definition of amusement is considerably darker than binge-watching a Netflix series about serial killers. But here you do not get to turn it off when you feel uncomfortable. You just watch and hope you are not next. The smell of blood, the roar of the crowd, the oppressive sun pressing down, it all seeps into your senses until you feel dizzy and you stagger away, only to realize that work still awaits you, because executions are a break, not a holiday, and there are still hours left before supper. You trudge back through the streets, dodging pigs, children, and chamber pots, and think maybe you will not last until evening, because your body is already collapsing from hunger, exhaustion, and despair. Modern life, with its ergonomic chairs, office jobs, and microwaves, feels like paradise compared to this, and yet the Tudors accept it as normal, because they have never known anything else. Now that you have endured the executions, the chores, and the endless parade of smells that seem determined to haunt your very soul, it is finally edging toward evening, and you might think perhaps the Tudor day will show you mercy, but of course it does not. Instead, you are summoned back to the cottage where supper is being prepared, which sounds like a pleasant domestic scene until you realize supper is just breakfast, reheated and watered down into something resembling swamp broth, with maybe a bone tossed in for flavor, if you are lucky, and by flavor I mean the vague hint of marrow scraped from a femur that has already been boiled 3 times. Today you slurp it because hunger trumps taste, and because complaining about food in Tudor Britain is like yelling at the sky for being grey. It just is. You chew on a crust that could chip your teeth, and you pray you will not have to visit the barber surgeon anytime soon, because his idea of dentistry is hammer, chisel, and prayer. with a side order of bloodletting. While you eat, you listen to the gossip, because gossip is the Tudor equivalent of television. It fills the room with scandal, speculation, and the occasional dangerous whisper someone heard. The king might be displeased. With one of his wives, someone else swears they saw a neighbor talking to a stranger who looked suspiciously foreign, and you nod along, trying not to get dragged into the conversation, because every careless word is ammunition that could land you in prison, or worse. Imagine modern social media, where one bad tweet ruins your career. Now amplify that by the possibility of actual decapitation, and welcome to the Tudor dinner table. The smoke from the fire continues to choke the air, because chimneys are rare luxuries, and your eyes sting while your throat feels coated with soot. And you realize that yes, you are basically living inside a fireplace all the time. The children, if they are still alive, are fussy and loud, and they climb on your lap with sticky hands while coughing directly into your face, ensuring that you will soon share their illness. But since every Tudor is already half sick half the time, no one even notices. Meanwhile, your spouse reminds you that there is still work to do before the day ends, perhaps mending clothes by candlelight, or preparing wool for spinning tomorrow, or patching the roof before the next rain leaks directly onto your bed. There is no such thing as leisure unless you count sitting very still. To conserve what little energy remains in your aching body, you dream about a soft mattress, Netflix, and pizza. But your reality is lice straw and soup made from yesterday, and the day before, and the day before again, and you begin to understand why most Tudors rarely smiled in portraits, because what exactly would they be smiling about? As darkness falls, the town outside grows quieter, except for the occasional drunk shouting his way home from the alehouse and the distant bark of dogs scavenging. In the streets, you peer out the small window and notice that night in Tudor Britain is pitch black, darker than anything modern city dwellers can imagine, because there are no street lights, no glow of electricity, only moon and stars. If the clouds allow you stumble outside for one last visit to the latrine, and immediately regret it, because stepping into that foul pit in the dark is like willingly entering the ninth circle of hell. The stench soaks into your clothes, your hair, your very soul. You hurry back inside, gagging, and realize that darkness brings its own terrors, because every shadow could conceal thieves, witches, or spirits, and since the Tudor world believes in all of them, you clutch at a wooden cross, muttering prayers, and hoping nothing supernatural or very real decides to visit tonight. Eventually you lie down again on the straw mattress, the same miserable sack of reeds and pests that greeted you this morning, and you curl up against the cold while trying to ignore the sound of rats skittering in the rafters above you, and the occasional thump that suggests something larger moving around, perhaps a cat, or perhaps something less friendly. You itch from lice, you ache from labor, your stomach growls and churns from questionable food, and your lungs wheeze from a lifetime of smoke and filth. And you realize that you have somehow made it through a single day in Tudor Britain. Though you do not feel triumphant, you feel wrecked, hollow, and vaguely cursed. Modern people complain about insomnia here. You could fall asleep instantly from exhaustion, if only the discomfort would let you, but instead you toss in the dark, thinking of the execution you witnessed, the gossip you overheard, the endless work that waits for you again tomorrow. And you understand that surviving one day is hard enough, but surviving a lifetime here would break even the strongest. You close your eyes, listening to the distant toll of the church bell announcing curfew, a reminder that you belong body and soul to this rigid world of monarchy, church, and dirt. And as the sound fades, you drift into a restless sleep that offers no comfort, only temporary escape from the misery that greets you with every sunrise. Welcome to Tudor Britain. And congratulations, you lasted exactly one day, though barely, and probably not again tomorrow. You wake up again in that same sack of straw that now feels like it has developed a personal vendetta. Against your spine, every reed jabbing into your ribs like nature's reminder that mattresses are centuries away, and as you stretch, you hear the familiar creak of timber beams groaning under the weight of damp and rot, and you realize with a sinking heart that yes, another Tudor day has begun. Your mouth tastes like stale ale and despair. Your stomach is already begging for mercy, and outside the rooster screams its demonic cry, announcing that you must rise and face this carnival of human suffering once more. Breakfast is the same as yesterday because variety is a myth. Here a hunk of bread so hard it could double as masonry, and if fortune favors, you may be a smear of butter if the cow was generous. Though generosity is not a concept widely embraced in Tudor livestock, you chew slowly and wonder if your teeth will survive another year, given that half the population walks around with mouths resembling ruined graveyards, and dentistry is one step removed from medieval carpentry once you are fueled by this miserable excuse. For nourishment, you step outside and find the town already alive with noised children, running half naked through mud pigs, rooting through garbage. Women shouting, men hauling, and everyone looking like they have been awake since midnight, because sleep is never enough and life here is designed to grind you into dust. Today, however, is different because there is a festival brewing and you can feel it in the air. Not joy, not excitement, but that uneasy tension that comes when people have been promised entertainment, and entertainment in Tudor Britain usually means someone is about to bleed, or at the very least get drunk, enough to forget their lives for an hour. The marketplace is strung with crude banners, bits of cloth fluttering weakly in the breeze, and already people are gathering for the feast. Such as it is, someone has slaughtered a pig, and its carcass hangs from a hook, dripping into the dirt, where dogs fight over scraps, and children try to sneak handfuls of fat for cooking. The smell is overwhelming, but compared to the usual stench of sewage, it is almost pleasant. The musicians strike up a tune on fiddles and pipes, their instruments shrill and cheerful enough to mask the hunger growling in your belly, and soon the dancing begins. Except dancing is not just fun, it is also suspicious, because the church has decreed that too much merriment might attract sin, so everyone laughs with one eye over their shoulder, waiting for the parish priest to scold them about eternal damnation. You sway awkwardly in the crowd, trying not to trip over your sack shoes, and trying not to look too happy, because happiness in Tudor Britain is always suspicious. But before long, the festival shifts from dancing and eating to spectacle, and that means punishment is about to be served. The crowd surges toward the square, where the stocks have been freshly polished with the grease of human misery, and sure enough, a man is dragged forward, accused of petty theft. His crime? Probably stealing bread, because hunger is the true master of every Tudor belly. He is shoved into the wooden frame, his head and hands trapped, and the crowd erupts in laughter as rotten vegetables are hurled at his face. You are expected to laugh too, because mercy is dangerous and cruelty is communal fun. The punishment does not end with humiliation though, because the local constable announces that another soul is to be flogged for failing to attend church last Sunday, and the whip cracks against his back until blood soaks through his shirt. You flinch, but you clap, because not clapping is suspicious, and in this world, suspicion is fatal. By now your stomach churns, not just from hunger, but from fear, because you know that any mistake, even one word against the wrong person, could put you here next, in the stocks, in the whipping post, or worse, in the tower, where royal decrees turn gossip into death sentences. Speaking of the royal court, the town crier suddenly appears, a booming voice cutting through the chaos as he unrolls a parchment and begins to shout the latest decree. From the king, your heart clenches, because these proclamations are law carved into the very fabric of your existence. And today, the decree is about taxes. Of course, it is always about taxes. Another increase to fund the king's wars or palaces, or perhaps his endless supply of wives. The crowd groans, but no one dares speak against it, because the penalty for treason is not just death, it is death turned into theatre, beheading, burning, hanging, drawing, and quartering. You name it, the Tudors will find a way to turn your demise into a festival attraction. You imagine what it must be like in London, where the royal court parades in silks and jewels, while you rot in wool and mud. The gulf between classes is not just wide, it is cosmic, peasants-like. You laboring until your bodies collapse, while nobles strut through palaces, complaining about the softness of their goose-feather beds. The injustice burns, but you swallow it, because voicing it aloud would be suicide. As the day wears on, disease makes its appearance like an uninvited guest, reminding you that hygiene is a joke here. You see children with pox scabs, adults coughing into rags that are then reused as napkins, and old women limping with sores that will never heal. The plague has not yet arrived in your town, but you can feel its shadow lurking, and you know that when it comes, the streets will be littered with corpses, and the only response will be to nail the infected into their houses and wait for death to silence their screams. You feel a tickle in your own throat and wonder if it is smoke from the hearth or the beginning of something worse, because in Tudor Britain, illness is not a question of if, but when, and the treatments are often deadlier than the disease. If you fall sick, you might be told to swallow mercury or bleed yourself until you faint. And if you survive, it will not be because of the cure, but in spite of it. The festival continues with drunken revelry, the ale flowing like dirty water, which it basically is, and soon the crowd is stumbling, singing off-key songs about kings, battles, and saints, while pickpockets thrive and brawls break out over spilled drinks. You keep to the edges, trying not to attract attention, but the noise and chaos swallow you up until you feel dizzy again. You think about how modern festivals have food trucks, music, lights, and security guards, while here your options are pig-fat ale and the risk of catching syphilis from someone who sneezes in your direction. The sun begins to sink, and the revelry slows into exhaustion. The crowd disperses, leaving behind a mess of bones, rags, and vomit for tomorrow's pigs to scavenge. You trudge home heavy with the knowledge that this is life in Tudor Britain. A cycle of hunger, fear, disease, punishment, and fleeting moments of forced merriment that only remind you how grim everything else is. You collapse onto your straw sack again, knowing that tomorrow will be no better, that the king will still issue decrees, the church will still demand obedience, the stocks will still stand ready, and the shadow of disease will still hang over every cough. And yet you close your eyes because there is nothing else to do, and in Tudor Britain, surviving one day is already more than most can manage. Dawn drags itself through the narrow cracks of the shuttered window, and the first sound that reaches you is not birdsong, but the heavy clatter of boots on cobblestones outside, followed by the ringing of a town crier announcing a new decree from the king, his voice loud and cracked from endless shouting. You pull yourself upright, feeling the ache in your ribs from coughing all night, and realize that in Tudor Britain, survival means obeying voices like his. No matter how absurd the message might be today, he bellows of a new tax upon ale and bread staples that already cost more than most can afford. And though you groan, you know resistance is impossible, for behind every word of the crier stands the authority of Henry himself. Though live in the reign of Henry VIII is to breathe air thick with suspicion. The king, who once stood as a handsome young monarch admired for his charm and music, has transformed into a heavy-set figure plagued by festering wounds and consumed by paranoia. The court whispers of plots and conspiracies. Servants vanish, Overnight courtiers fall from grace in the blink of an eye, and you, standing far from the palace walls, still feel the tremor of fear radiating. Outward, every proclamation is a reminder that the king sees all, or at least believes he should, and those who cross him rarely live to tell their tale. Streets buzz with nervous talk, some mutter of spies in taverns, men who drink beside you and laugh at your jokes, but whose ears are tuned only to catch the slightest hint of disloyalty. You remember the man from last month, hauled away after making a careless remark about the king's swollen leg. He has not been seen since, the rumors say. He rots in the tower, his fingernails pulled away one by one until he confessed to crimes no one can quite name. The lesson is carved into every mind. Keep your head down, keep your words simple, keep your prayers loud enough to be heard by your neighbors. The sun climbs, you join the crowd moving toward the market. The smell of fish mixed with dung hangs heavy over the stalls, where women argue over shriveled vegetables and men haggle for meat that might be more rat than rabbit. The plague may not stalk openly in this moment, but disease clings to the damp wood of the stalls, to the sores on the butchers' hands, to the coughs of children darting through the mud, and the fear of sickness mingles with the fear of authority. One enemy invisible, the other crushingly visible, both equally lethal throughout the day. The church bells toll reminders of how religion has become a shifting ground beneath your feet. Yesterday prayers to the Pope might have saved your soul. Today those same prayers could damn you as a traitor. Henry's break with Rome has turned faith into a weapon. Neighbors eye one another suspiciously, wondering who secretly clings to the old ways and who has embraced the new. Some burn for choosing wrong, others prosper by betraying their kin, and as you shuffle past the parish door, you murmur a prayer, careful to keep the words vague enough that anyone listening might hear only what they wish to. Midday, the gossip of executions has reached you. A noblewoman accused of treason paraded through the streets before her beheading. The executioner's block is busy these days, and though you are far from noble, you know the line between peasant and prisoner is thinner than it seems. Theft, slander, heresy, suspicion itself, any of these can land you shackled, awaiting the swing of the axe, or worse, the slow agony of hanging, drawing, and quartering, which the crowd attends as though it were a festival. Parents bring children to watch as men are ripped apart, screaming, their intestines spilled onto the ground. It is both horror and entertainment, and you stand in the press of bodies, unable to look away, because to turn your back is to risk seeming disloyal. When the shadows lengthen, you find yourself in a tavern, dimly lit by smoky rush lights. Men crowd the benches, swilling ale and whispering about the king's wives. 6 marriages, each one a gamble of politics and desire. Whispers say his paranoia grows with every union. His trust shrinks, his rage expands, and the common folk learn to tread carefully, lest some careless phrase spoken after too much drink brand them as seditious. You sip thin ale, your stomach empty, your ears tuned to every word around you, because, in Tudor Britain, survival is not strength or wealth, but silence, caution, and the art of appearing invisible. Light falls again, heavy and damp. You return to your straw pallet, listening to the creak of rats in the walls and the rattle of another cough from the neighbor child, and as you stare into the dark, you understand that tomorrow will bring more decrees, more whispers, more disease, more fear. Survival here is not measured in years or months, but in hours. You close your eyes and wait for another uncertain dawn, and when the day breaks, in Tudor Britain, you are greeted not with relief, but with the creeping dread that comes from knowing you are alive in a place where the wrong word can end you faster than the plague itself. The air is damp and heavy with wood smoke, as if the whole kingdom is breathing through a chimney, and you shuffle into the rhythm of yet another morning, except now your ears are pricked for the sound of royal gossip and court rumors. because those whispers decide more fates than any sword on the battlefield. A single word from a royal favorite can lift a family into wealth or bury them in shame, and you realize that Henry VIII, the great swollen king himself, is the sun around which every lesser star must orbit. He eats, he laughs, he rages, he marries. He discards, he executes, and you live in the shadows of those moods as if tiptoeing through a forest, where every twig you snap is a death sentence. And here is the terrifying thing about him. He is paranoid to the marrow of his bones. His gaze drags across a room. Like a hunting hawk, always looking for disloyalty, he suspects you of treason before you have even thought about breakfast. And in a world where treason means anything from disagreeing with his hat to looking sideways at his new wife, you find yourself swallowing your words so hard your throat ashes sand. Yet silence is not safety, because spies are everywhere. They are as common as fleas. They sit beside you, at alehouses they pass by you, in markets they kneel near you, in church, their ears twitching for the wrong mutter about religion or the crown. A loose remark about how the new prayer book is a bit dull, and suddenly your neighbour vanishes, dragged off to the Tower of London, where silence becomes screaming iron restraints, and eventually the blunt axe of an executioner. And you tell yourself you will be careful, you will guard every breath, but then you see how easily the lines shift. Last year loyalty meant honoring the Pope. This year loyalty means pretending the Pope never existed. And next year, who knows? Perhaps loyalty will mean keeping entirely still until the king decides which god he prefers. On a Tuesday, ordinary people survive by pretending not to notice the whiplash. They nod to whatever sermon is in fashion. That week they cross themselves one day and tear down crosses. The next they sing hymns they cannot pronounce. They hide old rosary beads in thatch roofs, and when the king's men come to search, they smile and say they have never heard of such superstition. Life is a game of masks in Tudor Britain, and every mask you wear grows heavier until your neck cramps from holding it up, and the cruelest part is that you might be punished whether you wear the mask or not. The baker who attends church too faithfully looks suspicious, but so does the one who skips too often. The farmer who prospers is a threat, but so is the farmer who fails, and in that trap you learn that survival is not about being good or bad, but about being invincible. Begin to understand why laughter in Tudor taverns sounds brittle like glass ready to shatter, because behind the clatter of mugs and the greasy smell of salted fish, every man and woman is measuring their words, glancing to see who listens. You learn to laugh at the wrong joke just loud enough. You learn to agree with whoever holds the loudest opinion, and you never ever say what you really think about the king, because honesty in Tudor Britain is not noble, it is suicidal. And when Henry storms through the palace, bloated and saw his leg, ulcers leaking through velvet stockings, the courtiers bow so low their foreheads nearly scrape the floor, not because they love him, but because they want to keep their heads for one more night. And so you tread carefully in this kingdom built on fear, with disease clawing at the paw and paranoia dripping from the crown. You realize survival is not measured in years or even months, but in the single breath between one royal decree and the next, and every breath you take feels borrowed like a coin. You will one day have to return with interest, so you walk the line as thin as a spider thread, knowing that one slip means the noose, the axe, or the silence of a prison where no one remembers your name. And when winter creeps back across Tudor Britain, the fear of kings and courtiers almost feels small compared to the bite of hunger, because power may decide who is executed, but the cold decides who starves. The fields are bare, the rivers crust with ice, and your daily bread shrinks to a crust that tastes of damp straw rather than wheat. For the poor there is no meat save the occasional scrap of bone boiled into water thin enough to show the bottom of the pot. And yet you eat. It because it is all there is. The smoke from half-burnt wood fills your lungs in every hovel, and the stench of unwashed bodies thickens as baths are thought dangerous, and draughts are believed to invite death. You wrap yourself in wool stiff with grease and lice, scratch at your skin until it bleeds, and tell yourself that discomfort is still better than the grave man. The nobles keep warm by burning forests to ash their tables, sag with roasted swan boar pies, spiced with cinnamon that was carried across seas on ships. You will never see, but do not mistake them for safe. Their wealth only paints their misery in brighter colors, for at those feasts you hear of new scandals and new disgraces. A smile too quick at the wrong guest, a whispered joke overheard by the wrong ear, and suddenly the man gorging on venison finds his head rolling into a basket gilded. Halls echo with secrets colder than the frost outside, and courtiers sleep with daggers close, not because they fear robbers, but because they fear friendsfer. The peasant's survival is simple. If brutal, you rise before dawn, break the frozen soil with a spade, or carry buckets of water until your shoulders scream, and when the day ends, you drink ale, not for joy, but because it is safer than water. You watch the parish bell tolling for yet another neighbor who coughed themselves to death, and you tell yourself you are lucky still to breathe. But luck in Tudor Britain is thinner than parchment. One unlucky harvest, one petty tax, and your family joins the countless forgotten. In shallow graves you whisper prayers, though you are never sure which. God is in favor this week, and you live not because life is good, but because you are stubborn enough to endure it 1 hour longer than the earth expects you. Drag yourself from the damp pallet again before dawn, because Tudor Britain does not allow long dreams. Morning is a slow struggle, a battle between the will to rise and the weight of cold pressing against your bones. The fire has long since guttered out, leaving only ash that clings to the bottom of the hearth like the remains of yesterday's hopes. Someone mutters a curse and sets about striking flint, trying to coax a spark from steel. If the fire refuses to catch, you will spend the day with frozen fingers and stale bread so hard it could double as a weapon. You chew anyway, for hunger is less forgiving than cold. Teeth crack on grain husks left behind by lazy millers, but you do not complain. Complaints are dangerous because they might be mistaken for rebellion, and in Tudor England rebellion ends with iron chains or worse. So you swallow your breakfast with silence, washing it down with weak ale sour enough to curl the tongue. Outside, the land lies stiff and brittle, every field hardened by frost. The world is grey, broken only by the flutter of ravens who seem better fed than you. They circle over the churchyard, where the earth never rests because graves must always be dug. Some say disease is sent by God, others by sin, others still by foul air rising from the river. None of them are entirely wrong, yet none are right enough to matter. You pull your cloak tighter and pray the frost keeps pestilence at bay, though deep down you know prayers are as thin as the smoke that leaks from every thatch roof. Meanwhile, in the halls of power, warmth flows like stolen treasure. Nobles complain of winter, even as their hearths blaze with imported coal, and their kitchens belch steam from pots of venison stew. You hear tales of ladies warming their hands in bowls of rosewater while you crack ice to drink. They smear honey on bread thick enough to drown an ant, while your children gnaw at crusts with hollow eyes. The gulf between your table and theirs could swallow kingdoms whole, and yet both rich and poor remain chained to the same dread, the will of a king whose moods rise and fall like tides of blood. Henry VIII rules like the weather, unpredictable, shifting from sunshine to storm with no warning. A smile from him means your fortune grows. A frown means your life shrinks to the edge of an axe blade. Whispers of treason hang thicker than fog. In taverns, men drink cautiously, for a loose tongue could betray them. In court, courtiers bow until their backs ache, eyes darting like hunted deer. For them, survival is not in the fields, but in the subtleties of favor. A misplaced word can kill faster than plague. You learn quickly that power offers no safety. Those closest to the king fall hardest. You remember Anne Boleyn, once queen, then nothing more than a body buried under the tower's stones. You remember men of learning, bishops, chancellors, even trusted friends all toppled in the blink of an eye. In Tudor Britain, heads roll as easily as barrels from a cart, and still the church bells ring. Mass, once Latin and eternal, shifts now with the winds of Henry's desire. One week you kneel before saints, the next you are warned not to name them at all. Yesterday's faith becomes today's heresy. You keep your prayers vague, hoping God understands confusion. The punishment for choosing wrong is fire, and flames do not discriminate between good hearts and mistaken tongues. Disease stalks every lane, carried by rats as fat as cats. You see children coughing blood, their faces sunken like skulls, and you wonder how many mornings remain before the cough finds you. Women boil herbs, men hang charms, priests offer blessings, and none of it works. Death comes anyway, always in silence, always in numbers. When a house is marked with plague, neighbors avoid it as though it were cursed. Sometimes they are right. Sometimes the sickness leaps anyway, spreading like wildfire in the close air of towns. Yet life does not pause for mourning. Festivals still fill the calendar, bursts of color in the bleak gray of existence. Shrove Tuesday brings games that leave men bloodied but laughing, tossing balls through the mud of fields. May Day crowns a queen of blossoms, her hair tangled with garlands, while the ale flows and children dance until their legs give out. But even these joys hide shadows. A festival can mask hunger, not erase it. A dance can forget the gallows for a day, not for a lifetime. Punishments remain a spectacle, designed to remind you of obedience. Stocks stand in every market square, ready to hold a thief until he freezes or starves. The lash sings across bare backs. Sometimes an ear is cut, sometimes a nose, sometimes worse. Executions gather crowds, larger than any feast. Children sit on shoulders to see a traitor's last gasp. Vendors sell pies and nuts to those who want a snack with their spectacle. You stand there, watching, trying not to look too horrified, because horror could be mistaken for sympathy, and sympathy is dangerous. You clap when others clap. You jeer when others jeer. You chant the king's name, because anything less could bring suspicion. But suspicion is not the only fear. Taxes grind at you like the stones of the mill. Every penny scraped from your purse feels like a drop of blood stolen from your body. The crown demands, the landlords demand, the church demands, and you wonder what is left for your family. Sometimes you hide a loaf, sometimes you skim a measure of barley, sometimes you tell yourself that survival is not theft. You live in the cracks between laws, because the laws were never written for you. And through all of this, you are reminded, you are not the hero of Tudor England, not even the villain. You are its furniture, its background, its breathing dust. Your story will not be written in books. At best, it will linger for a few years, in the memories of neighbors. At worst, it will vanish before the worms finish their work. You try to imagine a future where people live differently, with cleaner streets and fewer gallows. and the thought feels like a dream you should not have dared. The court spies watch not only nobles but townsfolk. They listen in taverns. They pry at markets. They slip coins into hands that deliver whispers. You know this because you've seen men vanish after careless speech. You teach your children early. Trust no one. Speak less than you know. Smile when commanded. Kneel when ordered. Survival is silence. Survival is obedience. Survival is the ability to make yourself invisible. And yet invisibility is not always enough. Hunger has a way of drawing attention. When a child cries too loudly, when a family grows too thin, neighbors notice. Some offer bread, others offer suspicion. Why do they starve when we do not? Envy festers, sharp as frost. Accusations of witchcraft grow in the cracks of jealousy. You see women dragged before courts for nothing more than healing with herbs or being too poor to defend themselves. You do not speak because speaking would tie your fate to theirs, and the fire consumes quickly. Even so, joy finds its way through cracks like stubborn weeds. A lute strums in a tavern. A song rises, crude and unholy, but enough to make you laugh until tears streak your dirt-caked face. A child runs in the frost, chasing a dog too fast for its legs, and you forget for a moment the weight of taxes, the cough in your lungs, the shadow of gallows. For a single breath, you remember that life continues even in a kingdom of fear. At the end of the day, the fire dies low again, leaving smoke to cling to your hair. You lie down once more on straw that smells of sweat and mildew, listening to the drip of thawing ice. The silence is never total. Somewhere in the distance, dogs bark, men shout, bells toll. But your eyes close, because exhaustion is the one thing Tudor Britain provides without measure. You sleep not peacefully, but because your body demands it. Tomorrow will come, and with it, another battle against cold, hunger, suspicion, and the endless shadow of power. In this land, survival is not about thriving. It is about lasting one more hour than misery expects. One more dawn, one more crust of bread, one more whisper swallowed instead of spoken. And in Tudor Britain, that is as close to victory as anyone not born into silk will ever come. The morning once again begins, not with the soft chiming of some delicate bell or the soothing rhythm of a gentle clock, but with the harsh scrape of a wooden door being thrown open and the sound of feet on uneven floorboards, and you realize that another day in Tudor Britain has begun, whether you want it or not, and as the faint light leaks through a mist of smoke that has never truly cleared. From the room you wonder why the air tastes more like yesterday's fire than today's promise, and the truth is that nobody here begins a day refreshed. They simply begin it and carry on, and this is considered survival enough because the night has not claimed you with plague cough or a quiet knife in the dark. You step outside and see the streets, already alive with the creak of carts and the bellow of men, calling out goods that you neither want nor can afford, and there is a strange theatre to it all, as though life in Tudor England is one long play where everyone knows their lines, but you stumble through half blind with no rehearsal and no script, and yet you must keep acting because standing still too long makes you look suspicious. And suspicious is a word you do not want attached to your name in this age, not when informers lurk at every tavern table, scribbling notes about who muttered what under their breath after the ale took hold for a moment too long. The smell of fish rides in on the air thick and briny, the river's spoils carted into town with baskets that drip across the mud, and you imagine the Thames itself groaning under the weight of all the waste poured into it from chamber pots and tannery scraps and rotting animal parts, and yet somehow this is still where people fetch their water with buckets. dipped straight from the surface, because wells are costly and clean water is a fantasy, so you learn quickly that to drink is to gamble, and in Tudor Britain gambling rarely pays off, except maybe for the house, and here the house is always disease you. Drift through the noise to witness a sight that passes for daily entertainment, a petty criminal tied to the pillory, his ears red from the pinching. Cold, his face painted with rotten vegetables hurled by passers-by, and you realize this is the Tudor version of morning news. A reminder served up with bruises that law and order is less about justice and more about performance, because punishments are never quiet, they are meant to be seen, smelt, and heard to echo across cobblestones. Like sermons that never end, and as the man coughs out the taste of cabbage and spit, you wonder if tomorrow it could just as easily be you for failing to pay some tax or for whispering about the king's latest marriage. Speaking of marriage, you hear whispers carried by the merchants lining the square, for news travels faster than plague fleas and far more recklessly. Henry has remarried again, or at least that is the rumor, though who can keep count anymore? Wives come and go as easily as the seasons, and with every new one comes new loyalties, new enemies and new decrees, and what you must understand is that in Tudor England, the king's personal life is not his personal life. It is the law of the land, it is your religion, it is the food on your table, it is whether you breathe freely or choke quietly in a cell, and when his desires shift, your prayers shift with them. Even if yesterday you prayed to the Pope, and today you pray to the English crown, and tomorrow you may pray to nobody at all, because corpses do not pray. And this is where paranoia begins to gnaw at the edges of your mind, because you start to notice the glances, the way neighbors step closer when you speak, and then repeat your words later in the tavern to others who may or may not be listening for coin. You realize the greatest plague here is not pestilence nor famine, but suspicion, because suspicion starves you. Before bread runs out, suspicion infects you. Before boils appear, suspicion drags you to trial before your body has the chance to give up naturally. And as you weave through these narrow streets, where timber beams hang over your head like crooked teeth, you learn that the safest words are the ones you never say aloud. By midday, the court itself hums with rumors sharper than any blade, and you cannot help but picture the glittering halls where Henry himself sits, a figure both bloated and terrifying. In his grandeur, a man who feasts while his kingdom hungers, a man whose shadow looms over every loaf of bread you eat and every prayer you whisper, and you wonder how it must feel to dine in his presence, surrounded by tapestries heavy with gold thread, while the smell of roasted meat fills the chamber thick enough to drown in, while musicians pluck out tunes you barely recognize, because the sound of knives scraping against bones drowns them out. You imagine yourself seated at the farthest end of that long table, where scraps tumble down like blessings, and where smiling too little earns you suspicion, but smiling too much earns you the same. The courtiers around him are no better, their eyes darting with the speed of rats, their words slippery as oil, because in this game of survival, flattery is bread and gossip is currency, and you either pay in both or starve in silence. And you understand now why so many live in terror of saying the wrong thing, because the wrong word once uttered cannot be pulled back into the mouth. It slips into the air, where spies catch it like flies in honey, and once caught it becomes truth, whether you meant it or not. And if you think escaping the court means escaping danger, you are wrong, because in taverns and villages the same fear festers, only dressed in poorer clothes here. Survival is measured not by jewels or lands, but by whether you can keep your head down long enough to see another Sunday market, and yet even there you are not safe, because sermons are watched and recorded prayers are judged, and a pause in your amen can be twisted into heresy faster than you can finish crossing yourself. So you learn to pray with perfect timing and flawless lips, because anything else is an invitation to ruin. As the day drags on, you feel the weight of laws pressing on you, laws that stretch into every corner of life. From what you may wear, to what you may eat, to whom you may touch, and even how much. You may dream because dreaming too loudly about a better world is dangerous, and so you tuck your hopes away like contraband in the folds of your tunic, pretending that obedience is comfort while hunger knots your stomach like rope, pulling tighter each hour until you forget whether it is rope or simply the sensation of being alive in Tudor Britain. When night falls, the streets grow darker than you can bear, and the only lights left flicker from tallow candles, whose smoke thickens the air and stains the walls with grease and soot. And you understand why people fear the dark, because in Tudor England, the dark is not empty, it is full of knives and whispers, it is full of officials who might knock on your door with questions already sharpened into accusations, it is full of diseases that creep into lungs while you sleep, and so you lie again on your straw bed, scratchy and restless, and you count yourself among the lucky not. Because you are comfortable, not because you are happy, but simply because you are still here. And so another day in Tudor Britain slips through your fingers like grit, carried by the wind, and you know that tomorrow will be the same again, filled with hunger, suspicion, punishment, and the constant looming shadow of a king whose desires decide whether you live or die. And you realize that the truth is not that you would not last a day here, but that lasting one day is already too much, and yet tomorrow will drag you out of bed all the same, because history has no sympathy, it only keeps moving. You wake to the echo of boots on cobblestones outside your window, and the thin morning light slants through the cracks in your shutters. If you were lucky enough to have shutters at all, and it brings with it the faint smell of damp straw and the sharper smell of fish guts thrown into the gutter the evening before, for this is Tudor Britain, and street cleaning is about as reliable as the king's temper. You stretch your aching limbs, but your body feels heavy with yesterday's labor, and you realize that today will be no kinder to you than any of the ones before. The markets will already be alive with shouts of hawkers calling out their wares, and the squawking of chickens bound for someone else's stew pot. And as you step into the street, you are reminded that Tudor society is not one great unified mass, but rather 1,000 little hierarchies piled one upon another, and each one makes sure to press its weight down on the ones below it. The rich stride about with their brightly dyed fabrics and plumed hats and shoes that never once touched the mud of these lanes, while you shuffle past in your patched wool tunic, hoping no one notices how thin it has grown in places. And this is where the tension between appearance and survival begins, because in Tudor Britain it was not enough to be fed, you had to be seen as respectable, and the rich guarded their appearance like their treasure. Henry himself, with his elaborate silks and jewels, made it clear that wealth was a kind of armor. If you looked poor, you were assumed to be poor, and if you were assumed to be poor, you were assumed to be guilty of something. Idleness, vagrancy, heresy, take your pick. The laws themselves declared it, so the punishments varied from fines to flogging to being branded on the cheek with a hot iron. The state wanted you visible, as either useful or punished. No one could just exist quietly on the margins, and that made every day a performance you put on the best version of yourself you could muster, even when your stomach growled and your shoes leaked by mid-morning. The streets are full of news and gossip, and news in Tudor England is rarely trustworthy or pleasant. Someone says the king has a new favorite, someone else mutters that a heretic burned in Smithfield last night, and a child swears his neighbor saw the sweating sickness again over in the next parish, though no one can confirm it, but they all cross themselves anyway. Rumor is the bloodstream of Tudor life, and it rushes faster than any carriage could carry it, and in a time when literacy is rare spoken words can kill quicker than printed ones. A whisper in the wrong ear can mean you spend your evening in a cell beneath the Guildhall rats and Orland, while you might imagine that festivals are an escape from this relentless grind. You are quickly disabused of the notion because Tudor festivals are both riotous and terrifying. Drunken apprentices shove each other in the mud, bear-baiting crowds roar at the mangled animal dancing at the end of its chain, and the smell of roasted meat mingles with human sweat until the whole square is thick with it. You find yourself pressed into the crowd, not out of joy, but out of necessity, because if you are not present, if you are not seen celebrating, then suspicion falls on you, and suspicion in this world is more dangerous than hunger. So you laugh at the antics of the mummers. You watch the maypole swaying. You pretend for an evening that you are not a tired laborer with a cough that rattles your chest. When the sun sets, you might think relief has come, but the night holds its own threats. Torches sputter in the wind shadows, make every alley seem like the edge of the world, and watchmen patrol with halberds ready to prod anyone who looks out of place. The curfew bell tolls, and you better be behind a door somewhere, because being caught abroad after dark without good reason can mean jail or worse. But even if you are inside, the fear doesn't lift. The plague could just as easily be working its way through your street as you sleep. A simple fever becomes a death sentence, and a single cough can clear a room faster than any menu. Try to picture life at the royal court, far from your mud-streaked shoes and patched tunic. There is splendor, sure, there are masks and banquets, but there is also paranoia sharper than the edge of a sword. Henry VIII rules like a storm cloud, and his courtiers tremble at the lightning. You hear tales of noblemen rising overnight, only to fall just as quickly, and sometimes their heads roll with them. Spies are everywhere. Tongues wag and eyes watch from every corner. It is said that even the walls have ears, so if you were to whisper your complaint about bread prices in the wrong place, you might find yourself accused of speaking against the crown. And no one cares to ask if you were only hungry. This is the world you inhabit, a hierarchy so rigid that stepping out of line is a death wish, yet flexible enough that anyone from butcher to baron might be dragged under if the tide of suspicion rises too high. You survive not by strength, but by silence, not by courage, but by caution, and you realize, as you lie once more on your damp straw, that tomorrow will be no easier than today. Festivals will come and go, the diseases will flare and fade. The king will issue decrees and revoke them, and through it all you will endure by keeping your head down, by pretending the dirt is not in your lungs, by laughing when everyone laughs, and crossing yourself when everyone else does, because in Tudor Britain, survival is not about living, it is about not being noticed. And as you drift into another uneasy sleep, you know that you have managed once again to do just that. The night does not last forever, though in Tudor Britain it can feel as if it stretches on endlessly. Each cough from the neighbouring hovel, each creak of timber in the frostbitten beams makes sleep a shallow, fragile thing, yet somehow the dawn pries its way in, not with warmth, but with the dull light of a sun that rarely shows its face in winter. The air, when you step outside, is wet and grey, your breath curling like smoke in front of you, and the mud beneath your feet swallows each step, until you wonder if the land itself is trying to drag you down. The village is already alive with the slow shuffle of people carrying pails and baskets. The smell of wood smoke clings to every layer of clothing, and the church bell tolls with its usual authority, reminding you that in Tudor Britain the rhythm of your day belongs to God, or at least to the men who claim to speak for Jimin. The market square, a gathering is already forming. It could be a fair, it could be an announcement, it could be a hanging. The only certainty is that people will come, because in a life this harsh spectacle is sustenance as much as bread today. It is a proclamation nailed to the wooden post, the royal seal pressed into wax, glinting faintly in the grey light. Henry VIII has spoken, and though the words are scrawled in ink, their weight presses harder than iron. The decree announces yet another tax for the king's wars in France. And Scotland, though you know these wars are far away, you feel their reach. In the empty space in your grain sack, in the extra days of hunger waiting ahead, the crowd mutters some curse under their breath, others bow their heads, but no one dares to defy it. You have seen what happens to those who speak too loud. To the church, you hear a different sound, not mutters but laughter, faint though sharp. A small festival is being prepared, even in scarcity. People need distraction. A maypole will not rise in winter, but a few scraps of music and ale are enough to pull the villagers toward joy. However temporary, children dart around in patched tunics, playing games that blur hunger for a moment. Women trade gossip as much as goods. Men drink ale, brewed thin but still potent enough to loosen tongues. And yet, even here the shadow of authority lingers. The parish priest walks stiffly through the square, reminding everyone that God watches. Even during laughter, a reminder that merriment must not slip into sin. Punishment in Tudor Britain is never far from celebration, and sometimes the two are one and the same. The stocks stand at the edge of the market, their wood dark with age and filth today. A man sits locked within them, head and hands trapped, while villagers pass by. Some toss scraps of rotten food at him, others jeer, a few ignore him entirely. His crime might have been theft, or it might have been nothing more than speaking at the wrong time. Either way, the punishment is public because fear is a lesson shared. It is not enough that he suffers, he must be seen suffering. You cannot help but look because the spectacle draws you, even as it chills you, and you know that tomorrow it could just as easily be Eurydice to stalks the crowd. You see it in the yellow of a neighbor's eyes, in the pallor of a child leaning against their mother, in the cough that rips through the silence. Between shouts, plague has not yet returned this year, but everyone knows it will sooner or later, and every rash, every sneeze, every sudden fever sparks dread. No healer can protect you from fate, and the best charms, holy or herbal, often do nothing at all, yet you cling to them. Sprigs of rosemary at the door, prayers whispered before bed, leeches for fever, all because to do nothing would feel like surrender. Through all this, the layers of Tudor society remain stark and immovable. Peasants bend their backs to survive. Merchants haggle with sharp tongues and sharper eyes. Nobles ride past with furs trimmed in ermine, barely glancing at the mud. They splash onto you, their world and yours, separated by walls thicker than stone, yet every decree from their halls carves into your life. Every whim of their feasts robs from your table. You might never see the king's face, yet his shadow drapes over every street and every shivering figure in the square. Day grinds on, as it always does, toil, trade, prayer, punishment, and fleeting joy woven together. Like threads of a coarse cloth, the sun dips. Though it was barely bright to begin with, and the cold grows sharper, your belly remains hollow despite the scraps you gathered, your mind heavy with the weight of decrees. Laughter stocks, sickness, and prayers. You wonder if tomorrow will be kinder. But you know better. Tudor Britain does not offer kindness, it offers survival, and if you can endure one more day, that is victory enough in a land where even kings sleep uneasy. Nightfall comes quickly in Tudor Britain, and with it the heavy silence that settles over the village, broken only by the distant bark of a dog or the groan of timbers contracting in the cold. Yet silence does not mean peace, it means the day has ended without disaster, and that is enough, for most sleep is shallow and scattered, broken by dreams of famine and fire, but still it comes because the body demands it. When the morning breaks, you rise stiff and aching, the fire long since dead, the air thick with damp. You pull on the same rough garments from the day before scratchy wool that never seems to lose its itch, and step outside into the waking world. Streets are still slick with muck, the straw scattered yesterday to cover the worst of it, already churned into filth by boots and cartwheels. A cart rattles past its wheels, threatening to give way under the weight of barrels bound for the tavern. The driver curses, the horse curses him back in its way. Life in the village is a constant trade of insults, laughter, and labor survival mixed with dark humor, because without humor the weight of hunger and fear would be undead line. The churchyard you pass by, rows of graves, some fresh, some crumbling with age, the earth here never rests. Priests remind you that death is but the gate to eternity, but you cannot help but notice how quickly eternity comes for the poorer child, who coughed in autumn lies beneath the soil before winter ends, a woman wasted by childbirth. Buried beside him, the ground is crowded, yet still more will join the priest, chants his rites with weary repetition, but his eyes look elsewhere, already thinking of the next funeral, for in Tudor Britain the business of death is steady and sure. Further along you see signs of power, not the raw power of kings, but the smaller cruelties of local officials. A reeve stands in the square, tallying grain collected for tax. Villagers bring their sacks, reluctantly weighing out the king's due and watching their winter stores shrink before their eyes. Some mutter that they will starve, others keep silent, but all comply, for the reeve's staff is backed by royal decree, and refusal means punishment. You watch a man try to hide a portion of his harvest, only to be caught and struck, his grain confiscated, his family left with less than enough. The crowd watches and learns that rebellion is not worth the risk. Amidst the hardship trade still thrives, though thin and uneven. Merchants call out their wares, cloth from Flanders, salt from the coast, cheap trinkets and charms for warding off sickness. The goods feel exotic, but they are priced well beyond what most can pay, yet people linger just to look, imagining what it would be like to wear velvet or eat sugar, imagining but never touching, in a world where most meals are pottage and bread and meat appears only on feast days. Sugar is not food, but a dream, sold by the ounce and spoken of with a punishments remain as vivid as dreams to you. Hear whispers of a thief whipped through the streets until his back split open, a woman accused of scolding her husband, paraded with a bridle locked over her tongue. You glance at the stocks again and see a new figure confined, his face flushed with shame, his fingers stiff with cold. The children throw clumps of mud at him, while their parents look on. Not all jeer, some watch in silence, grim, as if reminding themselves of the fine line between spectator and victim. And yet for all its harshness, life has its brief flickers of warmth. You see it in the alehouse, where men gather shoulder to shoulder by the fire, cups in hand, their talk weaving between laughter and grumbling. You see it in women spinning together, their gossip as steady as the turn of the wheel, in children chasing one another around the square squeals, echoing against timbered walls. For a while hunger and hardship slip aside, replaced by something close to joy, but always on the edge lurks the reminder that tomorrow may bring summons, taxes, sickness, or worse if nobility appear. Rarely yet their presence is felt, even in absence. When a lord passes through the village, he brings color and splendor, silks that shimmer in the grey light, horses draped in velvet guards, armed with pikes, yet his eyes never meet yours. He rides as though the village is no more than scenery, his power distant, yet absolute. You know that your entire existence bends to the will of people who will never know. Your Namith church bell tolls again, summoning villagers to service. The air inside is heavy with incense, the flicker of candlelight casting long shadows across the stone walls. Sermons thunder about sin and obedience. God's will and the king's order are spoken of as If they are one and the same, you kneel on cold stone, hearing every word, knowing that whether you believe or not, you must listen for, in Tudor Britain, faith is not optional, it is obligation. Those who stray risk not just damnation, but public shame. Or worse, if day wanes slowly, the light bleeding away, until only fire remains to hold back the dark. You return to your hovel, the door creaking as you push it closed. The smell of smoke clings to everything inside. The small fire flickers, casting your shadow against the wall. You eat your meager meal, bread rough and hard, dipped in broth, thin as water. You chew, slowly drawing out the taste, knowing it must last you. Think of feasts held in noble halls, tables groaning with roasted meats, spiced wine and golden bread. Think of them, but never taste them, for such bounty belongs to another world. As you lie down to rest, the sounds of the village drift in muffled voices from the alehouse, a dog barking, the faint toll of a bell marking the hour. Your body aches with fatigue, but your mind lingers on the weight of tomorrow. Will the king demand more coin? Will sickness strike your household? Will hunger sharpen into starvation? In Tudor Britain, every day survived is a triumph, and every night endured is victory of its own. You close your eyes against the cold and pray, though you wonder if God hears prayers spoken from hovels, or if his ear belongs only to the halls of kings. You wake to the sound of bells again, only this time they do not toll for the dead, they toll for a summons. The parish priest barking that all must attend a royal proclamation in the square. And though your body aches and your mind begs for sleep, you drag yourself through the mud, because in Tudor Britain, the king's word is not a thing to ignore. It is life and death, painted in ink on parchment, nailed to wooden boards. The herald shouts names and decrees in a voice already hoarse from weeks of repetition across counties and villages, and every sentence sounds like a threat cloaked as law. New taxes to fund the king's latest war, a war you will never see, except in the empty fields where the best men have been taken to fight. New punishments for those who dare speak against the crown. New rules on what prayers may pass your lips, and though the words are wrapped in holy language, all you hear is that another trap has been laid, another noose quietly strung after the proclamation. You shuffle home, clutching what little bread you manage to find at the market, and already it tastes bitter in your mouth, for the king's men stand everywhere, watching, listening, their eyes sliding over the crowd like blades. You think about speaking. You think about whispering that none of this makes sense, that kings gorge on feasts while you starve, but you bite your tongue until it bleeds. Because in this land, tongues are severed as often as heads, and gossip can carry you to the gallows faster than plague can carry you to the grave. But life does not pause for fear, it trudges forward like an ox dragging a plough. You must still work, still mend roofs, still tend goats, and yet everywhere the shadow of power presses down. Festivals now feel less like joy and more like performance. When maypoles are raised and dancers circle them with ribbons bright as blood, you clap and smile, not because you feel cheer, but because not smiling would mark you as suspicious. The church bells call for sermons where the priest rails about loyalty to God and King, and you nod, though the words twist in your gut, because tomorrow those same bells might ring with a new order, a new prayer, a new prayer, a new God. Entire life diseases do not rest either, they stalk your nights like thieves. Sweat soaks sheets, lice crawl in your hair, and rumors spread faster than cures. You hear of sweating sickness, sudden and brutal, taking strong men in the space of an afternoon, and you lie awake wondering if the next fever in your body will be the one that carries you away. But even sickness becomes another thread in the fabric of survival, for in Tudor Britain fear is constant. It is stitched into every cough, every glance, every decree, and still you wake each day because there is no choice. Survival here is Not about thriving, it is about enduring one more dawn under a sky that feels heavy with judgment in. The courts far above you, Henry himself stalks through chambers. Suspicious of everyone, his temper snapping like dry wood courtiers flatter him with. Trembling smiles, women parade like trophies through gilded halls, spies slither between servants and noblemen alike, and each day someone falls from grace. One day a man dines beside the king, the next his body swings in the breeze outside the tower. And those who remain pretend not to notice, because noticing is dangerous. The king's paranoia is a storm that drowns the innocent and guilty alike, and though you are only a peasant far removed from silk and velvet, you feel its rain seep down into your thatch-roofed hut every time new laws are nailed to the parish door. So, you live in a world where joy and terror walk hand in hand, where festivals mask fear, where bread carries hunger, where the church demands obedience and the crown demands silence, and still you endure, because in Tudor Britain, lasting one more day is victory enough. You wake before dawn, not from rest, but from the familiar gnawing of hunger. The belly has its own cruel clock, and in Tudor Britain it rings louder than any church bell. The embers in the hearth are long gone, and the damp has crept into your bones, but still you rise, because the day demands it. Your boots are stiff with mud, your tunic stiff with sweat, and yet there is work to be done, always work to be done, and little to show, for at Chuteside the lane is already alive. With the shuffle of other weary feet, the air smells of dung smoke and the sharp tang of tanners' vats. Nearby you hear the clatter of hooves, the shouts of drovers, and the occasional whimper of a child too tired to walk, but forced to keep up. No one lingers. Long idleness is a crime as much as sin in a world where suspicion can be as fatal as plague-worthy. Marketplace is the heart of the town, but it beats unevenly today. The king's men are there, their halberds glinting like the teeth of wolves. They nail fresh parchment to the post. Another tax on ale, another fine for disobedience. The herald drones on about loyalty, duty, God and crown, but the words slide off the people like cold rain. Everyone knows the meaning is simpler. The king needs coin, and you will bleed it whether you have it or not. You buy what you can, which is never enough bread. Already hard by morning onions, shriveled and sharp salted fish that tastes more of brine than flesh. Every bite a reminder of your station. You pass stalls heavy with richer goods, wheels of cheese, fat geese, bolts of bright cloth, but those are for others, nobles, merchants, anyone with coin and favor enough to dodge the slow suffocation of hunger. Back in the village, rumors scuttle faster than rats' whispers about the Queen's fall or the rise of some new minister. The rhythm is always the same. 1 week, a man or woman is the sun around which the court orbits. The next, they are nothing but ash, their heads displayed to remind everyone. What happens when ambition runs faster than loyalty, and loyalty itself is a shifting word today? It means obedience to the king tomorrow. It may mean obedience to his latest decree, and who can keep track when the rules change with his mood sound? Yet, while heads roll in London, you are not spared the grind of survival. The fields still must be ploughed, though rain drowns. The furrows, the thatch still must be mended, though rot eats the beams. Hunger does not wait for politics. It chews at you as faithfully as any mastiff gnaws a bone. Sometimes you wonder which will kill you first, hunger, sickness, or suspicion. But you do not speak the thought aloud. The walls in Tudor Britain have ears, and they are eager to trade whispers for coin. Church is compulsory. The bell tolls, and you go, not from faith, but from necessity. The priest thunders about obedience, about the fires of hell and the mercy of God, but the words of not his alone, they are written, handed down, demanded by the king himself. 1 year prayers are for the Pope. The next year prayers are for the king as head of the church. No one questions the switch, at least not out loud in pews. You sit shoulder to shoulder with neighbors, each of you nodding, muttering amens, all knowing the performance is as vital as breath, and beyond the village, beyond the markets and fields lies the machinery of power, the courts where robes sweep across cold stone floors, the palaces where Henry feasts while his subjects gnaw at crusts, the tower where cries echo from damp cells before the axe falls. Spies and informants slither through every hall and alley, secret cell, higher than spices a careless joke can weigh. As heavy as treason, the gallows are never empty, they creak like trees in the wind. The smoke of executions rises like a second set of church bells, marking time through fear, but still there are moments of strange resilience. The midsummer fairs where men drink too much and dance until their legs give out, the harvest feasts wherefore one-night bellies are full, the ale is warm, the laughter genuine though brittle, the Christmas-tide fires that burn bright even when frost cracks the earth apart. These are stolen hours when you forget that the crown hovers like a sword above you, when you forget that tomorrow a proclamation may snatch the warmth away. Children play in the lanes, their games rough and simple, hoops rolled with sticks, bones tossed like dice, their laughter too high-pitched to be silenced by hunger, though you see in their limbs the thinness of want, and in their eyes the hard knowledge that childhood does not last long here. By 12 a child is already a worker, by 15 already at risk of the lash, the noose, or the pox. Disease is the great equalizer. It cares nothing for wealth, though the poor fall first. Sweating sickness can strike at noon, and by sunset the body is cold. Smallpox leaves scars that last. A lifetime plague makes corpses of whole households, and yet still life presses forward, for the living cannot stop to mourn. To long mourning means neglect, and neglect means death too. Are you lay down at night on straw that smells faintly of mold? The roof drips, the wind rattles through cracks. You pull a thin blanket tighter around yourself and listen to the noises of the wild dogs barking in the distance, the groan of timbers, the slow hush of breath from those beside you, and somewhere always the bells tolling again. They toll for the dead, they toll for summons, they toll for prayer, but mostly they toll to remind you that this is Tudor Britain, and survival here is not about victory, not about triumph, but about endurance, about waking again tomorrow, even if tomorrow brings nothing but the same, the morning of another. Tudor day comes not with peace, but with the rattle of carts outside, and the sound of boots on cobbles, for the city never sleeps quietly. Each dawn brings not only the chance of bread or work, but also the fear of proclamation, a new law shouted into the streets by a man with lungs loud enough to reach every ear, and today the cry rings out that taxes will rise again, this time on salt, that most basic preservative that keeps your fish from rotting and your meat from stinking. Overnight the words hit you harder than the winter chill, for you know this means hunger, not for the rich who will pay and sigh, but for you who will eat less and starve more. And you curse not with your tongue but with your empty belly, because words of kings always find their way into your gut. Markets open anyway, and you shuffle through mud that reaches the tops of your boots. Stalls creak beneath baskets of onions, turnips, and a few tired apples, their skin wrinkled like the faces of the old women selling them. Fishmongers shout over each other with sprats and eels slapping against wood, their smell choking the air. The butchers wave cleavers, slick with fat and flies. And all around you people haggle until their voices rise into arguments, because every penny counts here. Coins change hands slowly, as if each one carries the weight of survival, and you know that to lose a farthing in a bad bargain is to lose a meal for your children. Yet in the middle of this squalor stand the watchmen dressed in their half-rusted breastplates, holding halberds taller than most men. They do not haggle, they do not sweat, they simply watch their eyes, sharp for stolen bread. Or whispered treason, for in this land both are punished with equal severity. A loaf lifted from a stall might hang a boy by the neck, while a joke about the king's swollen belly might see a grown man's tongue nailed to a post. The presence of these men makes the market quieter, not safer, and you lower your head when they pass, because in Tudor Britain, silence is often the only shield. At midday you hear drums, not from merriment, but from the square where punishments are dealt. The crowd gathers as if to a festival, though no joy fills the air, for spectacle is its own currency. Here a woman is dragged forward, accused of scolding her husband too loudly, a crime enough to earn her the bridle, a cage of iron fitted over her head with a plate across the tongue. She is paraded through the streets, while gears follow her each step, her eyes burning with humiliation that cuts deeper than any whip. Then a thief is brought forth, caught stealing a pair of shoes, and the rope waits for him, because mercy in these times is rarer than justice. His body swings while children stare, not in horror, but in casual curiosity, because this is as common as bread. You walk away shaken, though you should not be, for you have seen it before, and will see it again. But each time, the weight of it settles into your bones, and you remember that your life is held not by your strength or wit, but by the fickle moods of rulers and laws, written in ink, sharper than any blade. Still the world does not pause for grief. The baker calls out that his loaves are nearly gone, the smith hammers iron until sparks fly, and the tavern door creaks open to invite men into its smoky belly, because life in Tudor Britain does not stop, even when death takes center stage. It lurches forward on tired legs, evening creeps across the city. Like smoke the bells ring for prayer, and the church fills with voices muttering Latin. Few understand, but all pretend to believe. The air is thick with incense, masking the sweat of the crowded pews. Candles flicker shadows across stone walls, painted with saints whose eyes never seem to close. You kneel on aching knees, whispering words you do not fully know, because whether you believe or not matters less than whether others believe you do. The priest speaks of sin, of loyalty, of God's will, and though his voice is soft, you hear the weight of politics inside it. For in this time, faith is no longer safe. It is a weapon that can damn as surely as a sword one. You step back into the street, night has fallen, and danger sharpens the air. Thieves crawl from alleys, gamblers crowd into taverns where dice clatter, and knives slip easily into fists. The smell of ale clings to every man stumbling home, while the watch patrol with lanterns their flames, feeble against the dark, but enough to catch faces turned the wrong way. You keep your head low and your feet quick, because night in Tudor England belongs not to the dreamers, but to the desperate. Yet even in this shadow, life pulses through. Laughter spills from doorways where music scrapes on violins and pipes. Lovers whisper beneath windows, and somewhere in the distance a baby cries its first thin breath into the world at last. You find yourself back where you began, hunched in your corner of survival. The walls thin, the straw rough, the air damp with mildew. You curl against the cold and let the weight of the day press into you, for you have endured another cycle of fear, work, hunger, and spectacle. You think of those who did not, the thief who swung from the rope, the woman in her bridal, the nameless sick coughing in alleys, and you know that tomorrow will bring the same drums, the same bells, the same cries of merchants and proclamations of kings. Yet still, you close your eyes, not from comfort, but from exhaustion. Because in Tudor Britain, to live even one more day is not triumph, it is resistance. And in your stubborn breath, against the dark, you carry on after all the days you have endured in Tudor Britain. After the dirt and disease, the punishments and whispers, the market's full of hunger, and the court full of fear. You wake to what feels like the same day all over again. The cold presses against your bones. The smoke stings your eyes, and the church bells toll their endless chorus, reminding you that life here is short and survival is never guaranteed, but you have walked through it. You have seen the world of the peasants who break their bodies on the fields and still go hungry, the merchants who claw for coin while taxes crush them, the nobles who wear jewels but cannot sleep for fear of spies, and even the king himself, who holds all power and yet trembles at shadow sirs. The day moves on. You begin to see that life here is not just misery, it is endurance. The festival music echoes faintly down crooked streets, drums beating against the silence of winter, and for a moment you remember that these people laugh even when they should weep. They marry, feast, and sing, because to stop would be to give up, and no one can afford to surrender. In Tudor England, you pass by children, rolling hoops in the mud, their shoes little more than scraps, their faces smudged with soot, but their laughter piercing the gloom. You pass by a baker handing out a rare crust of warm bread, the smell rising like hope, and you notice how even here, amidst filth and fear, people cling to tiny mercies. And then there is the court, glittering, cruel, and watchful, the heart of the kingdom. You walk among its galleries and see the tapestries depicting victories and saints, covering stone walls that would otherwise freeze the breath from your lips. Courtiers smile with their teeth, not their eyes, watching one another with suspicion, because here power is as deadly as plague. One false move, one foolish word, and you vanish, replaced by another hungry name. Yet still they come, still they kneel before Henry, still they bow and scrape, because proximity to the throne is both poison and lifeblood. It is not survival, but a wager, and in this world, gambling with your head is the only way to rise you. Notice how religion presses on every moment. Priests chanting in Latin, villagers muttering in English, reformers shouting of Bibles in the tongue of the people, and heretics dragged into squares where flames eat flesh and smoke curls into the sky. Every choice is weighted, every prayer is political, even silence carries risk, so people tread carefully, balancing loyalty and fear, as if both were ropes stretched over a pit, and below waits not death alone, but disgrace. Memory erased in the roll of parchment and incute. Despite all this, Tudor Britain lives on houses creak, under snowfields yield when they can, bells toll, and children are born. You see mothers clutching infants swaddled tight against drafts, fathers teaching sons how to cut wood or mend a plough. Laughter still rings across courtyards when ale loosens tongues, and for all its cruelty, the world carries on, not because it is kind, but because people refuse to stop. You realize that this is the truth of the age. Survival itself is a rebellion against falls again, the fires gutter low, the frost spreads across rooftops like white lace, and the streets quieten. But you lie down, knowing you have seen enough to understand what it is to live a single day here, and that is already too much for most. In Tudor England, the coughs of the sick still echo, the watchmen still pace the alleys, and yet you close your eyes because nothing more can be done. You survived long enough to see the candle burn low, and in this world, that is a kind of victory. The story ends not with triumph or glory, but with quiet, the steady hum of life, carrying forward in spite of itself. The stars hang distant above a land of shadows and survival, and as your breathing slows, you know that tomorrow will be no gentler, no safer, but it does not matter, because this day is finished, and for now, the world can wait. Good night.